eyes of God especially, is not very long. They call it the Neo-Babylonian time period. You had like the ancient Babylons, Hammurabi going back to the time of, it was likely connected to the Amorites. You're talking 1,000 years prior to the Neo-Babylonian Empire, which we read about in these events. But 1,000 years prior in that part of the world, they would have been connected more with the Amorites, eventually defeated historically, likely by the Hittites. And then this is the Neo-Babylonian time period, sometimes called the Chaldeans. And that was between 626 and 539 BC. That will likely be in the quiz if you're taking notes. They're in 626 to 539 BC. And so hopefully I'm not losing you with numbers and history, just trying to put some things into context as a lot of events transpired in Scripture, but also supported in secular history as well, in many inscriptions and uncovering of all of these events. So it's amazing to see it. So it's written during a time of spiritual suicide, how sin is self-destructive, and we see that Judah, God's people, were not innocent in the matter. There is always accountability for any group of people, and that definitely is happening with the southern kingdom. And so that's something we'll look at a few scriptures just to continue to bring this out about why they were being punished, why God was allowing Babylon, a nation worse than, it's still a relative argument, but worse than them. How could you use them to punish your people? But they weren't innocent themselves either. The Lord does respond to Habakkuk's complaints, which we don't always get that. A lot of times in the prophets, especially the minor prophets, it's God speaking through a prophet to go send a message. This is actually a dialogue, a prophetic dialogue between Habakkuk and God that we actually have revealed, similar to what we have with Job as well. We don't always get that, and it's neat when we do, because we get a little tap into the Lord's words and his rationale that we, again, don't always know the specifics. Somebody asked me a question last week about, God providentially working not only in the past, but even to this day. Is God still operating and providentially working the same way? And it's a good question. We know that God doesn't change. We know that God can work, does work, has worked. But the difference is we can't pinpoint and say that's exactly what God is orchestrating, similar to an event like the Babylonians going into Jerusalem, because we don't have any new revelation confirming some of our theories. We just don't have that. Is God allowing that nation to invade that nation? And we just can't give that same confirmation that you would have in this event, where God's like, yeah, I'm raising them up, I'm doing this, and then they're going to be punished. And so we can say, yeah, God hasn't changed, and he may still be working in various ways that we could conclude. We know he is still an active God, but we don't always have that clear confirmation that we do like in events like this. So this is interesting. You got Habakkuk making complaints, a prophet of God, challenging God. And I want to try to think through that. That's where I've struggled over the years. Like, is it okay to do that? Is it okay to question God? I mean, Habakkuk says words like why, verse 3, verse 4, why? Why do you do this? Sometimes we ask God the same thing. But how do we receive his response? Are we willing to accept his response? And I believe that's a lesson we'll hopefully discover. Job definitely did. If you read Job, a lot of and his friends questioning God, and then God gives them like 3 or 4 chapters straight of, you don't know who it is in essence that you're questioning. Like you are you as a little human being, and I am the creator of the world. And even if I explain things to you, you probably couldn't even grasp everything I'm trying to say. And he'll say that to Habakkuk. I'm doing a thing in your days you wouldn't believe if I told you. He's going to tell him anyways, and maybe he'll kind of believe it, maybe he won't. But without further ado, let's get into the text, because that clock keeps ticking in the back. And so here's the outline. We're first going to look at the first 4 verses. The prophet's problem is stated. The prophet's problem is stated. Verse 1, the oracle that Habakkuk the prophet saw. O Lord, how long shall I cry for help, and you will not hear? This isn't the first time that a writer of God has used this kind of expression. In Psalm 13, verse 1, we see the same kind of words reiterated. How long, God, will you allow my enemies to thrive and the bad people to do good? And how long will you allow just sin and violence to continue and you don't do anything about it? How long shall I cry out for help? Again, in the eyes of Habakkuk, a day or a week or a decade might be a really long time, but in the eyes of God, that perhaps isn't as long as you would think. Or I'll continue the second part of verse 2. Or cry to you, violence, and you will not save. Why? I underlined that in my Bible. Why do you make me see iniquity? And why do you idly look at wrong? So the question's premise is that God doesn't care, or he's accusing God, in essence, of tolerating sin or not seeing what is happening or not aware of the violence. And the premise is very wrong, that we'll see later on. But how can you, God's idle here. This is what his assumption is. How can you idly look at wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. Strife and contention arise. And so he's really talking about Judah is immoral, is what he's saying. He's not calling out the Babylonians yet. They're not even mentioned yet until verse 6 or so. He's just saying, my people. I mean, if you look at Jeremiah 20, Jeremiah 9, I guess I'll look at a few verses. I may not hop back and forth as much as I want to, since I know we have a lot of text. In Jeremiah 9, look at verse 2. So the first 8 chapters is Jeremiah just calling out the southern kingdom, who is like a roller coaster. Sometimes they're doing good, sometimes they're doing bad, sometimes it's a huge drop and they're going down quickly, sometimes it's little ups and downs depending who's the king at the time and the influence upon the people. But Jeremiah is describing all of the events, and it's chapter after chapter, it's pretty bad in the southern kingdom. Verse 2 of Jeremiah 9. Oh, that I had in the desert a traveler's lodging place, that I might leave my people. Jeremiah's I just want to go away and go away from them, for they are all adulterers, a company of treacherous men. They bend their tongue like a bow. Falsehood and not truth has grown strong in the land. For they proceed from evil to evil, and they do not know me, declares the Lord. Let everyone beware of his neighbor, and put no trust in any brother. For every brother is a deceiver, and every neighbor goes about as a slanderer. Everyone deceives his neighbor, and no one speaks the truth. They have taught their tongue to speak lies. They weary themselves, committing iniquity, hearing oppression upon oppression and deceit upon deceit. They refuse to know me, declares the Lord. Therefore, thus says the Lord of hosts, behold, I will refine them and test them. For what else can I do because of my people? Their tongue is a deadly arrow. This is God speaking. It speaks deceitfully. With his mouth, each speaks peace to his neighbor, but in his heart, he plans an ambush for him. Shall I not punish them for these things, declares the Lord? And shall I not avenge myself on the nation such as this? I could keep going on and on. This is chapter after chapter of Jeremiah pouring out his complaints, God giving some response. It's bad. Their whole culture is evil upon evil, oppression upon oppression, lying, abuse, adultery, just all kind of terms that are used. So that's where Habakkuk again is questioning God. How can you idly just watch this? These are supposed to be your people who have the law and the priesthood, and the Messiah is supposed to come through. And it continues in verse number 4. So the law is paralyzed, and justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous, so justice goes forth perverted. You have what's called, in Hebrew type poetry, synonymous parallelism, just emphasizing the same thing. Theocracy is abused. The law of Moses has no effect. There's no real justice happening. They are legally, in essence, doing wrong. They're legally committing wrong. It's a terrible setup. It reminds me of what Amos chapter 5, verse 7, when we looked at that a few weeks ago, when he was critiquing just the justice system was corrupt. Everything was corrupt. The law of Moses was not being enacted and enforced the way it's supposed to keep the people pure and to keep the people different and distinct, paving the way ultimately for Jesus. It's a major problem. So that's all stated in the first 4 verses. Then you actually have the Lord's response and the Lord's answer in verse number 5 through 11. Let's read through that. Look among the nations and see, wonder and be astounded, for I am doing a work in your days that you would not believe if I told. What is that work? He's allowing Babylon to rise. That's ultimately the work that he's orchestrating behind the scenes and has been in the works. This passage, believe it or not, is actually quoted in the New Testament in Acts chapter 13. In verse 41, Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 5 is actually quoted in the New Testament. A couple times we see some quotations from Habakkuk, and it's in the context of them unbelieving the gospel, their unbelief towards a prophet's message. And he's saying, you probably don't want to go down this route of doubting God's plan and his gospel plan and his good news. And in the book of Acts, it's making the point, don't doubt what God is doing. He's been doing a work in your days, and he's making a reference, an allusion to how God was working during the time of Habakkuk. And so the inspired speaker is able to quote that in Acts 13. But what is that work? Verse 6, for behold, I am raising up the Chaldeans. That's the Neo-Babylonian Empire. And he says that bitter and hasty nation, not just this wonderful, sweet group of international. In Isaiah chapter 10, verse 2, called the Assyrian Empire, he called them the rod, quote unquote, the rod of judgment. Or God calls them the rod of my anger. The Assyrians were being used as a rod of God's anger to punish God's people. And if you look in another passage like Jeremiah 25, verse 9, Jeremiah 25, verse 9, the Babylonians who are being used by God to be contracted to put the judgment upon his people, he calls Nebuchadnezzar in Jeremiah 25, verse 9, quote unquote, my servant. It's not like Nebuchadnezzar was a faithful Jew or anything like that. He was just being called my servant was God's using Nebuchadnezzar to do this. And so that's really important to look at a couple of those references, Jeremiah 25:9, Isaiah 10, verse 5. Let's continue, verse 7, as God continues his response to Habakkuk's complaint. He says, they are dreaded and fearsome. Their justice and dignity go forth from themselves. They are a tyrannical group. They are self-derived justice is what they do. They're a law unto themselves. They do whatever they want. You're going to see and just how they mock any royalty or any leaders. They're a rough group of people. Look at some of the ways to describe them. Well, just how bad are they? Well, here's verse 8. Their horses are swifter than lepers, more fierce than the evening wolves. Their horsemen press proudly on. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like an eagle, swift to devour. Okay, it's not sounding good about the kind of people they should be expecting that are coming in judgment. Verse 9, they all come for violence, all their faces forward. They gather captives like sand, which is interesting because they will take many of them captive. They'll take King Zedekiah captive, and they use the expression like sand, which is a shout out to Joshua 11, verse 4, taking captives like sand. I mean, you can't count it. They're just innumerable how many captives they just go about taking whatever they want during their 90-year reign or so. In verse 10, at kings they scoff, and at rulers they laugh. They laugh at every fortress, for they pile up earth and take it. This is arrogance personified. This is who they are. These are bad people, and God recognizes that when he's telling Habakkuk. He says, then they sweep, verse 11, by like the wind and go on. Guilty men whose own might is their God. Their little g God is their might, their arrogance, their pride. And at the end of explaining how fast they're going to come in and their destruction, he says they're like wind. He says they're just going to come and go, by the way. And you're talking to a God who is past, present, future in essence at the same time. He sees he's already seen the season finale of the Babylonian Empire. He's like, look, they're going to come and go. Like, they're not going to be here that long. And they're terrible, but they're going to be like the wind. So Habakkuk hears this, and now he has a second complaint. So now the prophet's going to present his second challenge in charge to God, verses 12 through 17 of chapter 1. Are you not from everlasting, O Lord my God, my Holy One? So a question that recognizes the attribute of the eternality of God. God, you're eternal. I know from both ends, east and west. You're the holy God. We shall not die. In essence, you don't. Some of the Hebrew might allude to the idea that, well, God, you don't die, and the others say, well, it's God's people don't die. Like, you're supposed to work through your people, which I think that makes a lot more sense. In the way it's rendered in the ESV, we shall not die. Like, your people are supposed to make it. When all is said and done, like Jesus, we know, has to come from the southern kingdom. So you can't just annihilate us. Verse 12, the last part. Oh Lord, you have ordained them, Babylon, as judgment. Okay, I get it. And you, O rock, have established them for reproof. So he's challenging God while still acknowledging his eternality, his holiness, his mightiness, calling him a rock, an expression from Deuteronomy 32, verse 4. Deuteronomy 32, verse 4, God is the rock, a rock. Verse 13, you who are pure eyes. Now he's acknowledging God's purity attribute than to see evil. You can't see evil, God. Like, you're not supposed to be associated with evil. How can you have your stamp of approval in the Babylonians? You cannot look at wrong. Verse 13. Why do you idly look at traitors? Oh, I would quit challenging God if I were you, Habakkuk, calling him idle. And remain silent when the wicked swallows up the man more righteous than he. Which is this, in a sense, it seems like a valid complaint, and we might ponder a similar wording as well. God, how do you allow this to happen? How do you allow sin to not immediately go punished or to immediately go unpunished? It's kind of a question I probably won't get to in the last slide when I present various questions. Why does God not immediately strike vengeance upon societies and nations and individuals? Thankfully, I'm glad he doesn't do it individually as well. Why does he immediately not strike me down whenever we sin? And so it's part of God's justice and patience and love and concern in his purity. But again, Habakkuk's working through all this. He's expressing it. How can you allow the more righteous group, supposedly being Judah? And so verse 14, you make mankind like the fish of the sea. So he begins a fishing metaphor for the next few verses. For you make mankind like the fish of the sea, like crawling things that have no ruler. He brings all of them up with a hook. He drags them out with his net. He gathers them in his danger, and he rejoices and is glad. And so you see here this fishing metaphor, which I believe is very ironic. Not only is this symbolic, but it's also literal in some ways. Babylon will come up with a net and capture people up. And when you look at what happens to Zedekiah, the king of Judah, in Jeremiah 39, verse 7, there's also an Ezekiel reference that I had pulled up earlier in Ezekiel 12, verse 13. Ezekiel 12, verse 13, he in essence gets hooks and pokes out the eyes of Zedekiah and drags him off in chains to captivity. Now, he doesn't kill him, which was foretold that when it happened, but this hook metaphor actually becomes somewhat literal. And then in verse number 16, well, I didn't finish 15, he gathers him in a dragnet, and he rejoices and is glad. Therefore, he sacrifices to his net. So the Babylonians, they worship their might, and their altar is the net. Look what we have got. It makes offerings to his dragnet. Look how powerful we are. Look at our accomplishments. We're going to etch it in stone so that way in 2025 people can go to a museum and read about it, which is precisely what we get to do today. That's their God, their might and their power. Verse 16, for by them he lives in luxury and his food is rich. Is he then to keep on emptying his net and mercilessly killing nations forever? Now, no. The answer is going to be no, that's not going to be allowed. Will God judge him? Yes, he will. They need to wait. And that's why chapter 2, verse 1, the prophet patiently waits for God's answer. And here it is. I will take my stand at my watch post, which is a connection to being a prophet in a watch post. Isaiah 21, verse 8 says something very similar. Prophet at his watch post. I'm going to go on my watch post and station myself on the tower and look out to see what he will say to me and what I will answer concerning my complaint. And so I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait patiently for your answer, God. And he gets a response. In chapter 2, verses 2 through 4, we have a second reply from God to Habakkuk. Let's see how it goes. Write the vision and make it plain on tablets. So I love that there. There's a good devotional for communicating God's word. Just keep it simple. Keep it plain. We don't have too much fluff. Just what is the message? Make it plain. Write it on tablets. In other words, make it certain. Etch it in, not word of mouth or just some hearsay or just some comments. This is going to be etched. It's going to be permanent. Deuteronomy 27, verse 8 would be a good cross-reference here about etching something on tablets. Make it certain. Okay, so that he may run who reads it. So it's like almost compared to an edict from a king, like it will surely come and it will not delay. It will not delay. And by the way, this is quoted again, this phrase, this passage in Hebrews chapter 10. In Hebrews 10 in verse 37. So right after he tells people not to forsake the assembling of ourselves together, we need to be together, we need to be faithful, we need to be committed. There's a day coming, and we need to be faithful all the way into the end. Then the Hebrew writer calls back Habakkuk's writings in chapter 2, verse 3, where God says, if things don't seem like they're working fast or judgment's coming quick enough, just be patient. It's going to happen. And so he's taking a lesson from Habakkuk about just be patient. Things will come in God's own time. Behold, and this is also quoted in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 38. Behold, my soul, or his soul, is puffed up. That's Babylon. His soul is puffed up. It is not upright within him. And now they call this antithetical parallelism. So that's Babylon. But you, next phrase, but the righteous shall live by faith. So that's them. Their time's going to come. They're proud. They're arrogant. They'll rise. They'll fall. It'll be like wind. But you, God's people who are patient and waiting, you live by faith. And does that sound familiar? It sounds very familiar. It sounds exactly like Romans chapter 1, verse 17, Galatians 3:11, Hebrews 10, verse 38. 3 times this exact phrase is quoted in the New Testament. It is a tenet to faith and what faith is all about. Right after Romans 1, verse 16, for I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it's the power of God until salvation for the Jew first and then the Gentile. Then it goes on to say, and the just shall live by faith. A quotation from Habakkuk, meaning if you're going to live by faith, you faithfully and continually trust God. No matter what the circumstance, no matter what's happening externally, you keep going. All it means, this phrase, is a faith is actively trusting God. That's what faith is. Actively trusting God, even when things are chaos all around you or when things are calm around you. The just shall live by faith. That's why the New Testament can quote that same passage and make it relevant to you and I today. Verse 5, moreover, wine is a traitor, an arrogant man who is never at rest, meaning it's all false confidence that Babylon has. His greed is as wide as Sheol. It's endless darkness, the unseen world in essence. It's endless is how awful his greed is. His death, he has never enough. He gathers for himself all nations and collects as his own all peoples. He never stops his insatiable appetite. That Babylon's history, and you look at the Babylonian Chronicles, they never stop conquering until they are conquered by themselves, kind of at their peak even, where the Persian and the Medes come in, and you can look at the book of Daniel, and they come in and take care of the Babylonians, and they will indeed face punishment themselves. You have in verses 5 through 20, I'll see if I can do a quick version of this, woe to the Chaldeans. It's almost a song. It's a taunt song. Where you see it in lyrical form, 5 different woes to the Babylonians. And here's how it goes. I don't know if I'm going to sing it. I'll just read it. Shall not all of these take up their taunt against him with scoffing and riddles for him and say, number 1, woe to him who heaps up what is not his own. For how long? And loads himself with pledges. Their first woe is plundering what is not theirs. They take a pledge. In all these conquered lands, he goes, you're not going to be able to get away with that for a long time. Because, verse 7, will not your debtors suddenly arise, and those awake who will make you tremble? Then you will be spoiled to them. This is precisely what Isaiah 21, verses 5 through 9 describes. I don't have time to turn to it. Isaiah 21, 5 through 9, where it's actually the vision of Isaiah seeing as a watchman the people that supposedly owed them money rising up and coming towards them. They're like, uh-oh, it's coming back. The debtors are rising up against us. Verse number 8, because you have plundered many nations, all the remnant of the peoples shall plunder you. The Latin idea of lex, if I'm saying it right, talionis, the law of retaliation. It's happening to you now. For the blood of man and violence to the earth, to cities and all who dwell in them. Verse 9, a second woe. Verse 2, woe to him who gets evil gain for his house, to set his nest on high, to be safe from the reach of harm, their covetousness. They think nothing can touch their eagle's nest, and their whatever they gather, they put up high. Nobody's going to touch it. That's all going to come down. Jeremiah 49, verse 16. Even those eagle nests and proud nations will come down. Now, Jeremiah 49, verse 16 is actually about Edom and their pride, but nevertheless, it's the same concept. Just when you think you can't be touched, think again. Verse 10, you have devised shame for your house by cutting off many peoples. You have forfeited your life, their self-destruction. For the stone will cry out from the wall, and the beam from the woodwork respond. In other words, creation's going to testify how bad things are going on. That's exactly what Luke 19, verse 40, where Jesus said, even if these stones could speak, they would just tell you how bad things are about to become in Jerusalem. Luke 19, verse 40. Verse 12, woe, third verse, woe to him who builds a town from blood and founds a city on iniquity. Their extreme cruelty, possibly a condemnation of slavery here. They developed their city with blood, and it's just a terrible scenario. Micah 3, verse 10 is a good cross-reference. Verse 13, behold, is it not from the Lord of hosts that peoples labor merely for fire, and nations weary themselves for nothing? He's like, look, you've been building up the Chaldean empire, and I already know what happens. It's all for fire or for vain or for nothing. Like, it's all going to come down. All that work is going to be for nothing when all is said and done. Verse 14, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. Verse 4 of the song, if you will, in number 15 here. Woe to him who makes his neighbor drink. You pour out your wrath and make them drunk in order to see their nakedness. You try to humiliate your enemies. You will have your fill of shame instead of glory. Drink yourselves and show your uncircumcision, calling them like Gentiles and their shame and their nakedness. And by the way, they'll be you remember the drunken stupor that will take place in the book of Daniel. Perhaps a connection there. I didn't think about that, but could be. The cup in the Lord's right hand will come around to you, and utter shame will come upon your glory, this cup of wrath. Verse 17, the violence done in Lebanon will overwhelm you, as will the destruction of the beast and terrify them. Just like God has destroyed Lebanon, Lebanon's been destroyed, a big forest that was fortified, and nobody thought that Lebanon could be destroyed, but they were. Babylon will be destroyed. Don't worry about it. They will have their own accountability. For the blood of man and the violence of the earth, the cities and all who dwell in it. Then he mocks idolatry. What profit is an idol when its maker has shaped it? A metal image, a teacher of lies? For its maker trusts in his own creation when he makes speechless idols. Woe to him who says to the wooden thing, awake, to the silent stone, arise. Can this teach? Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, and there is no breath in it at all. In other words, mocking idolatry, and that does not just happen once. Isaiah 44, 14 through 20, 1 Kings 18, verse 27, numerous scenes where they talk about mocking idolatry. It's like, look, you get a piece of wood, you cut it in half of it you worship, and half of it you burn in the fire. They've always mocked idolatry, at least God has, and I believe, therefore, we can show how foolish idolatry is, and that's, in essence, the fifth verse, the fifth woe, the foolish idolatry. We're not going to have time. Maybe I'll just make this your homework to read Habakkuk's prayer and response in verses 1 through 19. Oh, I thought I could get there. I have a lot of comments to make on it, too. It's a very powerful prayer of Habakkuk's humble response to God giving at least two responses to his questions. But they are the lessons that we see here are, number one, the just shall live by faith. I've already commented on these, so I'll just put them up here. We see perplexing questions asked by God. It's my 1-minute warning. Why does God allow such terrible devastation to go unchecked? Why does God allow the innocent and the just to suffer while the ungodly criminals plunge us deeper into the abyss, the Sheol? And so we see those questions being addressed. God uses different means to enact his justice. Humans will always struggle to understand the big picture. And I believe this is very applicable even in our time as well. Accept and trust the Lord's plan, even when unsure. I would say this questioning is not sinful in and of itself. Our response, though, can be wrong. And that's why Habakkuk 2, verse 20 is a very... we sing this song sometimes, too. I didn't even read it. Habakkuk 2:20. Wow, how did I skip this? But the Lord is in his holy temple. let all the earth keep silence before him. Meaning, just accept God's response. Question it within your human mind and your limited, finite thinking. But ultimately, God has proven himself historically and consistently in our life. Ultimately, we should have reverence and humility towards God when all is said and all is done. And so, vengeance, as the reoccurring theme in all of the minor prophets, belongs to the Lord. I'll just put these questions up so when we're getting ready for the worship, you can look at it. Let me just finish with two verses real quick. The very end, chapter 3, verses 18 and 19. Yeah, I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. God, the Lord, my strength. He makes my feet like the deer's. It makes me tread on my high places, meaning deers never slip, apparently. Apparently, they have good balance. They're not going to slip, an expression that's found in Psalm 18, verse 33, to the choir master string instruments. And so you see this powerful song and these poetic devices saying, I'm going to be faithful no matter what. I'm not going to fall if the just live by faith. And so I hope you enjoyed our study on Habakkuk. Sorry I didn't get to read the actual prayer of Habakkuk. You can do so sometime this week. If you want to prepare for next week's study, we'll look at Zephaniah. And so let's conclude our class already. So we'll get ready for worship.